The king is dead. Long live the king. But what if that change in monarch stemmed from murder? What if the obvious candidate to become king was passed over in favor of the killer? I present to you the case of the Elsinore Coup. Thank you for finding the Low Murmur. Please share it with your friends and podcast enthusiasts. But now, let's start with the story as told by the sweet swan of Avon. Lean in closer and listen. To refresh your memory, Shakespeare's Hamlet begins with the late king not resting peacefully in his grave. Hamlet's friend and fellow Wittenberg student, Horatio, verifies the supernatural visage. But is it a ghost or a demonic illusion? This is the first issue raised by Shakespeare, and like so much in the play, it is open to interpretation. Even once Hamlet has seen and spoken to the apparition, we really aren't any closer to the truth. From a historic perspective, Wittenberg was a great center of knowledge, but with a very specific orientation. Wittenberg is the cradle of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther taught at Wittenberg. It was a serious school for serious people. It had such an important influence. Shakespeare tweaks the timeline to have it exist in the time of the play. From a modern American perspective, think of it as an Ivy League school. Among other things, but most relevant for the beginning of the play, it is known for Protestant doctrine and philosophy. There is no such thing as a ghost because there is no purgatory. What you think is a ghost is probably a demon trying to trick you. Contrasting the Wittenbergian view, we have Laertes, who is roughly the same age as Hamlet and Horatio, but is studying in Paris. This is the equivalent of going to a party school. Yes, he'll come back with an education, but he'll spend most of his time fencing, gambling, and carousing. A ghost? Yes, possibly a ghost, but as Pascal said, too much and too little wine. Give him none, he cannot find truth. Give him too much, the same. Hamlet has been taught intellectualism and logic, while Laertes has learned the chivalric values and passion. It's the medieval butting up against the Renaissance. Somewhere in the middle, there is Shakespeare's audience. The majority would have probably believed in ghosts, but they also wouldn't be too quick to admit that, as Catholicism was seen as treason. Horatio, possibly as a kind of bridge, notes the specter disappears when the rooster crows, which is a nod to folk belief which is more tenacious than royal decrees. The analytic Hamlet and the passionate Laertes are contrasted by the court of Elsinore, which is made up of conspirators, opportunists, and time servers. Even Hamlet's friends from Wittenberg, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, are corrupted by the court. They agree to try to cheer him up and distract him. Then they agree to spy and report back, all for those remembrances of the king. Before we step back into the shadows of the palace, let's take a quick detour to real-world scandal. Believe it or not, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern weren't just fictional pawns. They were based on real-life Danish aristocrats, the cousins Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. They visited the English court on several occasions during Shakespeare's time. There isn't any direct evidence he met them, but he at least knew of them through the gossip mills. My opinion, based solely on my own experience as a novelist, is that he did meet them and decided to kill them off in his play based on that interaction. The real-life Rosencrantz and Guildenstern attended Wittenberg, then went on their grand tour as was the custom. That's when they ended up in England. Things turned out fairly well for the real-life Guildenstern. He returned to Denmark and lived the life of a wealthy landowner. Things didn't go as well for Rosencrantz, who ended up overstaying his welcome at the Danish court. After impregnating one of the Queen's maids of honor, he was sentenced to have 2 fingers removed. His cousin, famed astronomer Tycho Brahe, pleaded with the king to let Rosencrantz keep his fingers, but to sentence him instead to serve in the army. The king took his advice, not out of any great love of Tycho Brahe, but because he did need more soldiers. Rosencrantz went off to war, and after initially making a very good showing for himself, died when he was accidentally injured breaking up a fight between 2 soldiers. Things didn't go very well for Reborg Brackenhus, the maid of honor Rosencrantz dishonored, either. She was sentenced to solitary confinement. Her father, who might have some parallels to Polonius by pure coincidence, went one better to show the king his fealty, or because he was so angry he couldn't marry his daughter off for his own benefit. He walled up the small room's entrance, leaving only a small slot to pass food into the room. Poor Reborg lived that way for 5 years, in spite of the pleas from her mother. When her father died, the wall was removed, and she slowly regained some privileges thanks to the Queen Dowager. She eventually was reunited with her son, who had been accepted into the Rosencrantz family. While tour guides will tell you she still walks the halls of Egeskov Castle as a lady in white ghost, she died free, living a life of relative luxury as a Danish noblewoman. But who is to say some echo of those 26 years of imprisonment doesn't still exist? An aside to the aside, Tycho Brahe was not without his own problems. Rumors persisted from the time of his death in 1601, 2 years after petitioning the king for Rosencrantz, until 2010 that he was murdered. Brahe fell ill after a royal banquet and, after 11 days, died. For 400 years, people debated whether he was killed by his assistant Johannes Kepler or King Christian IV. Both men hated him, but by most accounts, Brahe was a fairly loathsome individual, so there were many suspects. In 2010, it was finally proven he was not poisoned, but died from natural causes. Now that it's clear Tycho Brahe's death does not need to be avenged, let's return to an apparition who believes very strongly in vengeance. Whether the apparition of King Hamlet is a ghost or a demonic illusion, when the specter gets Hamlet alone, he becomes literature's most famous supernatural whistleblower. He's an otherworldly deep-throat who spills the tea not just on his death, but on the secret architecture of the afterlife. It's a classic description of what would have been seen as the Catholic Purgatory. To Hamlet, this would have been a shock to his intellect, on top of the shock to his emotions. In Wittenberg, he would have been told Purgatory isn't real, and yet here is the ghost of his father telling him he has come from Purgatory. But the specter has only gotten started. He tells Hamlet he was asleep in his orchard, his garden, if you will, when his brother, that serpent Claudius, slipped a poison into his ear. He tells Hamlet he must seek revenge. That's a lot. Your father was murdered by your uncle, who is now your stepfather and king, and, by the way, your views on the afterlife are incorrect. An interesting note, once the ghost is left and Hamlet speaks to Horatio, who conveniently did not hear the ghost story, Hamlet says, "Yes, by St. Patrick." St. Patrick is not only a Catholic saint, but a saint associated closely with Purgatory and with removing serpents. How apropos. What we know about the perpetrator of this political assassination. Claudius is the younger brother of King Hamlet. While King Hamlet was a warrior, Claudius is a politician. While he regrets killing his brother, he doesn't regret it enough to give up the crown or his new wife. We know he loves Gertrude. He has probably loved her for some time. We don't know if they were involved in a physical relationship prior to King Hamlet's death, but she has been swayed by the witchcraft of his wit. The people of the court, as well as Gertrude, have accepted the story of a snakebite so easily. I think it can be assumed people like Claudius and did not like King Hamlet. Claudius has the charisma. King Hamlet had the sword. Just as everyone fears another war with Norway, the king dies, and Claudius finds a diplomatic solution. Huzzah! This likability is important to how Claudius became king. At the time, Denmark was an elective monarchy. A council of nobles elected the new king. They could have chosen someone else, but Claudius had made himself the perfect choice. Perhaps he had been sowing the seeds for his own ascension to the throne before the murder. What we know from the play is that Claudius is a complicated character. He relies on his words to manipulate others. When he needs those words the most, as Gertrude is about to drink the poison, he fails to come up with a way to save her, and, as he has foreshadowed earlier by saying his soul is tethered to hers, he fails to save himself. Young Hamlet, as a student who has been away, probably wasn't much of a candidate. Claudius could have bribed, cajoled, and politicked his way through the council. While the people might love young Hamlet, the council is where the power radiates. All other things being equal, Hamlet's age would work against him. Claudius, who had been right there as his brother had become king, understood the system, how it worked, and was well situated to take advantage of it. While Hamlet hadn't shown any interest in being king of Denmark, he did eventually see the loss of the crown as a personal grievance. But first, Hamlet needed proof that the ghostly whistleblower wasn't blowing smoke. It wouldn't hold up in a court of law, but Hamlet felt if he and Horatio could see Claudius confronted with a scene similar to the murder he committed, he would give away his guilt by his reaction. It is as close to a Perry Mason moment as you will get from Shakespeare. Hamlet writes some extra lines for what he calls the murder of Gonzago. It's interesting to note that, like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Gonzago is a real person. In 1538, the Italian Duke of Urbino was murdered by a distant relative named Luigi Gonzago. Well, let's be fair, he was murdered by somebody. His barber, under torture, admitted to putting poison in the Duke's ear under orders from Luigi Gonzago. Sound familiar? Whether it went down like that or not, Shakespeare used the story as the basis of his mousetrap. Or he used a scene from a Hamlet, probably written by Thomas Kyd, which would have been more contemporaneous with the Italian scandal, for his mousetrap. As it is a lost play, we don't know much about that version, besides it roughly followed the legend of Hamlet and had a ghost shouting, "Hamlet, revenge!" We will never know how much Shakespeare borrowed. Returning to the mousetrap, Claudius reacts, and Hamlet is certain the ghost told the truth. Hamlet comes close to taking his bloody revenge, but when he finds Claudius, he believes his uncle is praying, so he doesn't kill him. We then have Claudius say, "Words without thoughts never to heaven go," so he didn't feel like he was praying. I've always found that interesting, that had Hamlet waited another moment and heard Claudius say that, he would have been able to kill him without the villain going to heaven. Instead, Hamlet leaves to go see his mother. This is when we get our first onstage death. In the Queen's chamber, Hamlet mistakes the figure behind a tapestry for Claudius and kills poor Polonius. As I've brought up earlier versions of the Hamlet story, let's take a step back a few hundred years to the story by Saxo Grammaticus in the Gesta Danorum, some call the Legend of Hamlet. Some of it will seem very familiar, such as the man who kills his brother and marries the widow, and the son who feigns madness then seeks revenge. But another character is in that version as well. He doesn't have a name in the story, but he's a courtier, referred to as a foolish old counselor and a secret spy who hides in the Queen's bedchamber to spy on the young mad prince, only to be discovered and killed. In the Gesta Danorum, the character hides in a bed of straw. Hamlet runs him through with his sword. He then cuts him up, boils him, and feeds him to hogs. Returning to Shakespeare, Hamlet also dishonors Polonius's body by hiding it, but we are spared the ghoulish overkill. A direct response to the murder of Polonius is the death of Ophelia. Ophelia, having been dominated by her father and rejected by Hamlet, finds herself alone after her father's murder by the man who rejected her. She can't even grieve that father properly, as he is secretly buried to cover up the murder. She goes mad. In her madness, she drowns. We can argue whether it was suicide or a tragic accident, but if her father hadn't been murdered, she wouldn't have lost her mind. If she was sane, and this is based solely on what we know of her, I don't believe she would go climbing a tree in a heavy dress above a stream. I could be wrong. Personally, I think it was a suicide, and if Hamlet had a sequel, her ghost would be haunting the castle. Before the play ends, we have other deaths as well. Gertrude, Hamlet's mother, drinks from a poisoned chalice meant for him. Claudius is stabbed by Hamlet, who makes him drink the last of the poisoned wine. Laertes is killed when Hamlet scratches him with the poisoned rapier, and Hamlet, who was also cut with the poisoned rapier, manages to hold on long enough to give his full support to young Fortinbras, then dies. And let's not forget, Hamlet also switched the letter Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were carrying for Claudius to deliver to the English court. They aren't guilty of anything, really, except for trying to curry favor with the king. They don't know Claudius has killed King Hamlet. They don't know Claudius wants Hamlet dead. The Bellerophonic letter seals their fate. And the last I would say about the duo, how much does Shakespeare dislike the pair? He's the English ambassador, pop up at the end to let everyone know they are dead. Yes, it didn't need to be said, as we all assumed, but he wanted no doubt. The Elsinore Coup was almost bloodless. Just one king that most people wouldn't have missed, but then that ghost had to demand revenge. I think that puts a tally mark in the column for calling him a demon. 2 whole families are wiped out, and a new soldier is king. The king is dead. Long live the king. Up next, by request, a late-night bedtime story. If you're brave enough to step inside the tapestried chamber. Following that bonus episode, we'll cast some light on the global shadow that is the Lady in White. Until then, listen for the Low Murmur.